when I was 19, my dad asked me what I wanted for my birthday, and at the time I had a little bit of interest in flying. A few little planes had been flying over, and I said, "Oh, I'd just like a flying lesson, please, Daddy." And so yeah, he bought me a flying lesson, and had the briefing. Got in the plane. The instructor took off. Said, "Okay, you have control." Took the controls, and I think a few seconds later, probably wasn't even minutes. It was a few seconds later. I said, "Okay, that's it. I'm going to be a pilot." Um, my dad was actually pretty good. He didn't just give us things. He always made us work for them. So he said, "Well, I'm not paying for your pilot's license. If you want it, you work for it." So he gave me the car and paid for the petrol. And I drove to the airport every single day. I got a job as general dog's body at RAF Manston when it was still open back in the day. And I did everything: answered the phones, booked out the planes, fueled the planes, put them back in the hangar in the evening, everything you can think of. And each day, instead of getting paid in money, they gave me 20 minutes flying time. So I put that down in the book. And at the end of the season, having worked a lot, I had enough flying hours accumulated to do my license. And that's how I got my first license. I didn't really want to be an airline pilot. I thought it kind of flew itself a bit. But it just so happened one of the jobs I got in the interim, pay the bills, was working for Virgin Balloon Flights. At the time they had their head office, the call centre was in London, near Baker Street. And I got a job doing that and answering the phones. And in a little while later, they relocated the office out of London up to near Wolverhampton. And Virgin actually, I'm sure they still are, but they're a very, very good company to work for. They offered us all relocation, redundancy, or an interview in another Virgin company. Obviously, they didn't promise us a job in another Virgin company. And they knew I was a pilot. And they said, "Well, have you ever thought about flying airships, blimps?" I was like, "What's one of those?" And they invited me for an interview. They sent me out to the airship, which at the time was in White Waltham, one of the smaller ones, the 40-meter long ones. And I flew in. I was like, "Oh, this is great," because these small airships, they traveled all the time. I mean, you lived out of a suitcase. And when I say lived out of a suitcase, I don't mean you went home every other week. You don't. You're on the road all year round. And I looked at it, I was like, "That's really cool. I'm 22. You know, footloose, fancy free. Why not? I'll do this for a couple of years. It'll look great on my CV." 28 years later, I'm still floating around the sky in blimps, but I love flying them. They're absolutely wonderful, and they're fly by feel, not by numbers. You know, there's nothing say you have to do this at this speed and do that at this point, and you really have to be able to feel the airship. And as a female Zeppelin pilot, I was actually the first. I kind of coax the airship down to the ground. Some of the younger guys, I feel like sometimes they wrestle it down to the ground, but no, I'm joking. No. But no, you really have to actually feel what the airship is doing, and you have to bring it down to the ground with all the tools you have available. And you have a lot of tools available and to how you can move it. And it is very much a ship. As I often said, it rides on the air like a boat on the water. The only difference is you can't see the waves. I've been every year over Le Mans. We've been to Monza, we've been to Imola, we've been to Brands Hatch was the last time we were in England. We did the filming over Brands Hatch. That was interesting. It was raining on and off, and every time they got back up to speed, one of the cars spun off and they slowed back down again. Very difficult for the filming. But what else have we done? I've done so many events, I can't even think of them all now. But yeah, we've been up to the Nürburgring and Spa in Belgium, and yeah, all over the whole of Europe, really. But actually, the smaller airships used to be branded with Goodyear many, many years ago. And the very first event I actually ever did with a Goodyear blimp was over Le Mans in 1999, which was quite a special year in Le Mans, not in a good way. One of the cars came off. It was the second biggest crash. And yeah, I was over the top of that. And I've been to Le Mans many times. But probably one of the coolest that I ever did in a blimp, Zeppelin, I've done so much cool stuff, but in the Goodyear blimp back in the day, I was in a Goodyear blimp at 11:59 on the 31st of December 1999. I was in the air over Barcelona, and it was amazing. When the clock struck midnight, I was floating around in the Goodyear Blimp. It was lit up from the inside. That was one of the old ones, and the whole city exploded. I mean, literally, there were fireworks all around me. I was like, oh my goodness. But it was spectacular. It was really spectacular and something I'll never forget. The most cool city I've ever flown over is London, bar none. And there's kind of a reason for that. So I have flown over New York below the level of the buildings, but New York just has what we have in the city of London. You know, the big high rises, and they're all just different high rises. But in London, we have that wonderful difference between the old buildings, you know, the Houses of Parliament, the Elizabeth Tower, you know, St Paul's Cathedral, Buckingham Palace, those really, really old buildings that everyone around the world who's ever seen a picture of London knows about. But interspersed with that, you have, you know, these massive high rises, some of them mirrored, and you can see the reflection as you go past of the airship. And you have, you know, the Shard, which I love, and, you know, the Gherkin, and you have all these wonderful buildings. And so you have the new side as well as, you know, like the London Eye. But yeah, but you've got that wonderful mix of the parks, the old buildings, the new buildings, the high rises, and that I haven't really seen anywhere else. It all looks really nice. I have to say, even quite honestly, you know, as we come out of London, we fly over Tilbury Docks sometimes. Yes, it may not be beautiful, but it's absolutely fascinating to see like the workings of all these different places from the air. And you can tell Belmarsh we definitely did not fly anywhere near Belmarsh. I'm saying that because the first time we flew over, they really thought we were flying over them, which, considering how many hoops we have to jump through to be able to fly into London at all, and I was talking to the controllers the other day, and they said they have a direct line to the controllers, but because it's so huge. I mean, bear in mind, this is 75 meters long. This is longer than a 747. It's even longer than the first A380, by a small margin, but it is longer. And it looks so massive, and we're flying relatively low for something that huge. I mean, if you put, you know, 747 at the height we fly at, people are going to notice. But yeah, so they always think it's closer than it is. We have lots of people say, you know, the Zeppelin flew over my house at 50 feet. No, we didn't. We were at 1,000 feet above you, but it just looks that low because it's so huge, and people aren't really used to seeing anything that massive flying that close. We are actually incredibly careful, which is why you're not flying today. So the weather forecasts written for aviation, they're not really written for us. There's a fresh system in the background. They're not written for us. So the difference between 10 knots of wind and 20 knots of wind means nothing to a big aeroplane, but it does to us. So we have to look a little bit more carefully into the weather, and we have to be really, really sure of what's going on. Today we had a forecast for later on. It's pretty much like a wall of wind that was coming in, and at first couple of days ago it was forecast, you know, 7, 8 o'clock in the evening. So we're like, okay, and then it just kind of got earlier and earlier. And when we stopped for a fuel break, so one flight before yours, we actually called the Met Office because we need to look further into just the forecast, and they told us, yeah, it's going to be earlier, which is why better safe than sorry. And interestingly enough, as we were coming back from the last flight of the day, we could feel it. We could feel that we were hitting the wall of wind. You really can feel that. And it went very, very quickly from almost nothing out of the south to almost 20 knots out of the east. And we got it safely on the master, which we knew we could, but we don't wait until it's got to the unsafe point before we land. We actually land before then. So yeah, I mean, it can be quite unnerving if the forecast isn't correct, but because of how we were trained, if the forecast isn't, if the actual is not like the forecast, then we look again, and we always double check. So sometimes I've taken off in the morning, it's nice and flat, calm on the ground, and I get above, you know, maybe 500 feet or so, and the Zeppelin is pretty much flying backwards. It's so strong. At that point, I can still land safely because it's still nice and calm on the ground, because you have temperature inversion. Temperature inversion is where it gets colder near the ground and it's actually still warmer air above, so the air layers can't mix. Obviously, hot air rises, cool air descends. You can always tell when there's a temperature inversion. Do you know how? Okay, so I can always tell if there's a temperature inversion if it's like, it's normally at night. Obviously, as you know, if you've got a clear sky and it cools down, you can smell what everyone's cooking for dinner, because none of that can rise. It's all being held down by the sinking cold air. So you actually can really, everything smells more. You know, you can really smell what's the next door neighbour's having for dinner. To be quite honest, one of the coolest flights I ever had was an old lady who was over 100 and had a voucher for the original Zeppelin. And she turned up with this voucher and we said, okay, it never expires. You can go flying in this one. Um, but, you know, and it was her dream. She used to see the old Zeppelins back in the day. And so that is infinitely cooler than anything else. And, you know, like little children that have a fascination for it. Or I have a young girl who comes up very shyly and say, can I ask you a question? And she's like, so girl, you know, I could be a pilot. I'm like, yes, of course you can. And those moments are what really make it special. I mean, I have to say, the second founder at Apple, Steve Wozniak, was absolutely lovely. He and his wife, very, very kind and lovely people. But we've flown many people. Some of them I'm not allowed to say that we flew them. But yeah, I have to say some of them were great. We've flown some landed gentry titled people. I don't think I've ever flown royalty. I did offer the Queen a ride years and years ago, but she was too busy. But yeah, all in all, I have to say there are certain people that, you know, it's their lifelong dream and they just love it so much and it's made their whole day. And sometimes it's made their week, their month, their year. And that is what I really enjoy. And as I say, anyone who gets on our airship is a VIP. To me, this is my normal. You know, floating around the world in an airship is my normal. But yeah, I am quite proud of the fact that I made it into what is certainly at the beginning of my career was very much a man's world. Glass ceiling, afraid not shattered. But I'm also lucky that my boss has a better understanding of where I come from than most bosses. Yes, he's male, but he also grew up in the other side of Germany. So he was East German and he understood being treated differently, being paid differently. That all still exists. It's not as bad as it was, but I can't say that it's disappeared. I mean, woman to woman, I can't tell you that it's disappeared. Now, most people don't notice if there is a female captain. Some people still remark on it. You have to love it. You have to love it, and you have to be prepared to point out to people when maybe they are not thinking, because a lot of it is just not thinking. It's just habit. You know, this has existed for so long that it's just normal. And it's only as I got older that I started to notice. But yeah, you have to be fairly dedicated. You have to love what you do. And if you really want to be a pilot, you have to have a thick skin and you have to learn not only to ignore, sometimes to stand up to that kind of behavior. But I would recommend to anyone to fly. I love the world from above. I really do.